or just a confirmation that folks in the webinar here can see the presentation title slide?
You could do a raised hand too, everyone. All right, looks like
How do I see that?
you
Yeah.
go in the attendees,
Yes, sir.
and then there's like a little arrow that it's pointing to the right. You click it, and then it opens up.
Okay. Perfect. Great. I'm also going to see if just to make this a bit more personal, I am going to share to do a camera here, a webcam. Hopefully, we can get both in line. Okay. With the presentation. So just another sort of hands up, and Dr. Williams, you may have to confirm. Can folks see both the webcam and the presentation, or just the presentation itself?
I see both.
Perfect. Well, I definitely appreciate folks being able to join, and I'm really excited to sort of give back to UMBC and the program. I actually worked with Dr. Williams a lot during my time in the program, and he was instrumental in sort of guiding my career path. And as you heard from the brief bio, going from a music education major, and sort of that's my background, to now I'm doing instructional design work for the Department of Defense. So I just want to thank Dr. Williams up front. A lot of credit in steering my career path into UMBC. Presentation this evening is going to be on the role of instructional systems designers in immersive training. So immersive training in the DoD is sort of a blanket statement for augmented, mixed, and virtual reality. If you don't know what that means right now, that's all good, and we'll kind of unpack what that means. But sort of as I went through the program, I was very green and new to how the consulting industry worked outside of teaching. I sort of grew up wanting to be a teacher, so I'm going to try to hit on points that I think are instrumental in both understanding how the ISD plays a role in consulting, contracting, the larger landscape, and then more importantly, the meat and potatoes here, how sort of these new technologies are emerging and the kind of trends that we're seeing. A bit about myself, just to sort of pretend like I'm a subject matter expert in the field. Dr. Williams said I have a master's degree in ISD, music ed degree. I was in the classroom for about a decade, K through 12 music and special education. Some of my instructional roles in the classroom were, live teaching as you would, in a traditional brick and mortar. But I did wind up working for some schools where distance learning and virtual teleconferencing was becoming very prominent. So that's actually what sort of sparked my interest in distance learning and e-learning and got me into the program. I've been doing ISD work for 7 years, a couple of years in project management. I know at least when I was in the program a couple of years ago, the idea of Agile as a development process or methodology for solutions, not just for training, but for any kind of solution, was a hot button word. And I wound up being certified in that. We'll talk about that this evening. Sort of my career background and my job role, my job profile, I'm a training project lead for an e-learning program that supports more or less homeland and security for the DoD. There's sort of, as I think that you'll sort of talk to folks who are in the DoD trade space, there's some limitations when we sort of have these outside conferences of what we can share, and it's not going to be tremendously vague, but certainly there's sort of caps on how much is shareable. So if there's sort of questions along the line, please ask. But I may have to deflect or sort of give a blanket answer for some things. This particular CBT is actually really prominent because it's the source node of instruction for an entire program for the DoD. It's basically a library of resources with step-by-step instruction with graphics and instructional videos and marketing videos, sort of how the program is structured, their particular program is structured, about policy. There's a resource library, all a CBT. We've also developed an extension platform for the mobile phone. So I know that sort of bit learning and just-in-time, training, sort of, again, hot button trendy topics, but I do have some background sort of taking training from the computer world and making it onto a mobile application platform. And then I guess most importantly for this conversation this evening is we do have a mixed reality, augmented, and virtual reality extension platform of our CBT. So we sort of have, what I oversee is one e-learning suite that started off a long time ago as a computer software driven training solution, and it's sort of branched off and grown and evolved over the years. A little bit about who I work for, just because, in the program I was talking to Dr. Williams prior to the start of the class. I knew nothing about Booz Allen or the Department of Defense, how contracting worked, and sort of what I can do in our conversation. I know that this is an upper level class, and we're sort of gearing towards a transition plan into the career field of ISD. I can certainly have those conversations, but as we're thinking about applying for jobs and looking for right fits in the industry, I will try to talk about my experience with my company, Booz Allen. Booz Allen is a prominent consulting firm, a lot of Department of Defense and government contract work, some commercial, over 26,000 people. It's a diverse workforce, it's a global workforce, big into innovative solutions that drive all the industries forward and keep technology on the forefront. Oh, sorry. I actually work at the Pax River location, which is in Southern Maryland. I'm a Baltimore native. I grew up sort of in the Pikesville, Brandlestown area, if you're familiar with Baltimore. But I migrated down here to Calvert County for this position a couple of years ago. It's sort of a brief overview on the slide here, but we have a lot of data scientists and engineers at our location here, which is actually a huge demand signal for training, and I'll get to that in a bit. At the end of the presentation, though, I will sort of talk about some opportunities at Booz Allen. I was recruited by Booz Allen actually through an email distro through UMBC. My current supervisor graduated from UMBC from the program, works for Booz Allen. And when she needed a new ISD, she went to UMBC and said, hey, send out this email distro like you guys get from the program leads. And I responded, and that actually led to my placement here at Booz Allen. I'll walk down this evening. I've talked about myself, but I do want to get to some introductions for the class. I'm very pleased that it's sort of a small group. We can have a lot of conversation, not rely on chat so much. So I will try to keep this interactive, sort of, putting my teacher hat back on, which is really nice. We're going to give a brief overview of government contracting. So before we get too into the weeds of the technology and the training solutions, sort of what the industry is as a whole, what signals the demand for that kind of training, the differences between augmented, mixed, and virtual realities, and then certainly how the ISD role plays a part in all of that. I'm going to talk about some professional learning and development that may be supportive or that supported me along the way, and hopefully we'll have ample time for question, answer, and discussion and things like that. So typically, when we sort of do these interactive pieces, we can do this in the chat, but I'd really, since I think we have the time and our group is small enough, just to briefly go around the room here. If you want to introduce yourself, the field that you're working in currently, where you want to be in the future, and also if you have any background experience in augmented, virtual, or mixed reality. Don't feel obligated to sort of share your webcam, but just keep this audio. We can do that quick. That'd be fantastic.
I'm
And I can't see the attendee list, so normally I'd call on folks, but if we can just do a quick around the room, just unmute your mic and tell us a little bit about yourself based on what's on the slide here.
How about we start with Brad? I see he's unmuted.
Sure. So currently I am also a teacher, moving from 4th to 5th grade in elementary. After completing the program, I'm looking to get into instructional design, or maybe just sticking with teaching and going into some sort of staff development role. And for my background with augmented reality and virtual reality, mixed reality, I did write a bit of a paper on that with paramedics using virtual reality and augmented reality for like training programs. And I've also used Oculus Rift before and almost threw up because my body didn't like that. But yeah, I think it's really cool. So I'm excited to see what you have to say.
Thank you so much. Now, is that Brad or Brett?
Brad is in Bradley.
Yeah, it's Brad.
Perfect. Thank
Sorry,
you.
yeah.
Thanks, Brad. That's awesome. Yeah, there's some of the iterations of the platforms. We've heard that here too. Is that folks sort of get to a demo stage and even to give it to a client, and we do some like aircraft and like aviation training, and especially with the motion, that's definitely been an identified issue. Thanks for telling us that.
Connor, you want to go next? You have to unmute yourself, Connor. All right. Well, we'll come. Okay, I think you're okay now, Connor. Sorry. Oh, you were unmuted. It says you're self-muted, Connor. All right, you're okay now. Go ahead. All right, Connor, we'll get back.
Instructional design.
Okay.
At
Go ahead.
maybe something's wrong with my connection or something.
Can you hear me now? I can hear you. Yeah, we're not. Something might be wrong with your connection. All right, we're gonna Connor. We'll get back to you. Let's try Stacy. Stacy, you there? You're self-muted, I believe.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I had to double click on it first said that it was muted by the organizer, and then I double clicked it and it worked.
All right.
Hi, Jason. My name's Stacy. I'm actually a Booz Allen employee also. I'm working as a curriculum manager in the people services group doing business development curriculum. So I'm pretty new to this position. I started with Booz Allen in December. Right now I'm just looking to grow within my position and within the company. And I have absolutely no experience with augmented reality or virtual reality. So I'm very interested to hear your perspective on it and try to see how it could fit into a business development curriculum or what types of curricula it would fit into.
That's awesome, Stacy. What office do you support?
My home base is McLean, but I work a lot from home.
Yeah, that's the mothership. So that's that's home base for all of us. Perfect. Thank you. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for sharing that. Yeah, we'll definitely circle back. I think that's a really good point. If there's I don't know if I have a slide about it, but that'll come up as sort of what applications would make sense for this. I think as a, in sort of the ISD program, there's discussion, about, training is great. When training makes sense, and when training does make sense, what kind of training makes the most sense for the application? That's a huge question that's come up with this. So I'll definitely put that down as a note. Thanks, Daisy.
Great, thank you.
Okay, Heather, you want to give it a shot?
Yeah, hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. So hi, I'm Heather. I am currently working at Morgan State University, and my official title is Instructional Technology Specialist. So I guess I support our instructional designers in the Academic Technology Services Department. Ooh, that's a mouthful. So so I do a lot of, mostly I think my day-to-day is I design a lot of online trainings, a lot of self-paced trainings at the moment. it's just kind of where we are. As far as in the future, I don't know. I guess I'd like to. I mean, I'm actually really pretty new to this position, so I guess like Stacey, I'm just kind of trying to grow within my position. Ultimately, I'm going to try to take over my boss's job, so there's that. As far as VR and MR and AR, I have some experience with it. When I was a classroom teacher, a colleague of mine was doing some interesting things with AR, and you know, like the QR scanners type deal. So it was just interesting to see how he was incorporating that. And right now, we're trying to spearhead something actually with our library department. They just got a bunch of Oculus Rifts, and they're kind of doing a VR sort of room. And so we've been talking with them about how to, there's a push right now to try to get more interactive training with what they call, I guess, pre-professional services or classes. So, you know, like our osteo medicine, I don't even know what it's called, our bone doctors and our physical therapists. We were thinking, and I know in the nursing department it was interested in also doing, using the virtual reality to help sort of, I guess, replace some of the labs that, you know, like the hands-on labs. I know phlebotomy, I think, was the one they were trying to do, and they were just trying to look at ways and how to bring more of that in, because they're like, there has to be a step between, you know, classroom practice and actually putting your hands on somebody. So they were hoping to do some more with that. Although then they start getting into the programming, and then I'm just way out of my depth, and I have to take a step back. But it is very interesting to see. The coolest thing, they actually did give me a demo that they actually programmed, I guess, some sort of demo for the VR space that they have. And the coolest thing was it was like a VR Space Invaders. I don't know if anybody remembers that game. I think I'm dating myself a little bit, but it was just crazy because I was like literally in the middle of it, and I kept dying because I didn't look up. So it was just weird, but it was creepy and kind of cool. And anyway, so that's my experience.
That's awesome. So what's interesting is prior to me coming to UMBC, I went to CCBC, and they have a huge nursing program. And I didn't think about the application there because they push out a lot of students that go into the field. That professional like transition program, hugely beneficial. Thank you for sharing.
No problem.
Okay, Pat, you want to go?
Hi, Jason. My name is Pat, and I work at UMBC as a transfer evaluator. And we do a lot with orientation. I'm always evaluating stuff, figuring out where things go. I don't know what field I want to do after completing my ISD program, but I'm kind of gearing towards training. And I don't know anything about the augmented reality, mixed reality, or virtual reality. Nice to meet you.
It's nice to meet you too, Pat.
All right. Sean, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey Jason, my name's Sean and I work at Northrop Grumman Mission Systems, and I am currently in the field of ISD and training. Primarily right now I do mostly classroom type of training for incoming manufacturing operators. So we do a lot of hands-on skills, but Mission Systems covers the entire US, so I also do development work for web-based trainings and support everyone across our sector. So something we're trying to do currently is really figure out good applications for web-based trainings and how we can incorporate that. In the future, after I get the ISD degree, I do plan to stay in the department, plan to stay in training. Later down the road, I am looking towards project or program management, hopefully. But right now I'm pretty happy with ISD. We are always looking for applications for AR and VR. A good application for us would be before allowing a new employee to touch a very expensive module, putting them in a VR type of situation and having them practice there first, and they can practice as much as they want. They're not going to create scrap or anything like that. So practice doing some sort of manufacturing operation in the virtual world, in the augmented world, and then once they've successfully completed that training program, then allowing them to kind of work on the manufacturing floor.
That's fantastic, Sean. So you actually, I think that we have sort of parallel paths, or very similar in that I did a lot of ISD work. I've sort of grown into a project lead for training systems. But he brought up the use case, and I don't know if that's a term that folks are familiar with, but a use case is just, what's the reason why somebody would want to use X product or service? And one of them is a huge savings for equipment and human casualty. So if there's very expensive systems that could be used, why not put them in an immersive learning environment, much like we've tried to do with CBTs, with computer-based training for a long time. But if we can make it more immersive, now that the technology exists, it's much more impactful without having the risk of actually causing harm to something or somebody. Same with the nursing program comment. Thank you, Sean, for sharing.
Connor, let's circle back to you. Hopefully your technology's working.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry. Okay, sorry. I'm actually on a business trip right now, and I'm using the hotel's Wi-Fi, and apparently they've been having issues this week. So my apologies. So my name is Connor Bequini. I am in the field of ISD, and I primarily focus on e-learning, and we do implementations in e-learning with mostly like big companies like SAP. And I don't really have VR background, but I have computer art background where I've worked with Autodesk Maya before. So I think that you can use VR for Autodesk Maya and some other art systems like, God, what are the other 3D programs? I'm blanking out, I forget, but Autodesk Maya was like the main one.
So actually, I'm going to talk about Maya for a bit because I took a training in Maya, and it was hugely helpful for somebody. I'm not graphic design oriented. That's not my background, but as a learning opportunity, I took a class or two on Maya, and it's fantastic. So yeah, it sounds like you're doing some really cool stuff. Have you ever heard of Unity? The program called Unity?
Yeah, I've used Unity before. Yeah, it's the game system. I haven't used the other engine before, but Unity is it's a hard tool to use, but it's fun to use and you get some cool results.
Very cool. Well, we're glad to have you, Dr. Williams. Did we circle around the room? Did we miss anybody?
I think everybody's introduced themselves.
I know that took some time, but I really appreciate it. I think it sets the stage as sort of, ISD 101, know your audience, and there's something to be said about a survey before the class, and that's totally cool. But just to sort of have this conversation, there's already some directions and sort of slides I can sort of skip, and that's not that relevant, but certain things that we could hit on. So very glad to have this diverse group here in the class. So, I talked a little bit about, I want to give a brief overview of government contracting. So if you ever take a government contracting course, it's going to be probably 8 billion more times complex than what's on the screen. So I tried to give this in 6 steps. I tried to sort of baseline things down at the most minimal level, just so as going into this conversation, we can explore this and kind of unpack some of the terminology that's being used. I think that sounds like some of us have experience with the notion of contracting and what that means. But before we dig into the technology, we'll talk about this a little bit. So government contracting pipeline sort of starts when there's a demand for a product or service. Now, some folks would say, well, why can't the government just produce it themselves? Why can't they create it? And I'm actually going to push that question off to the class here. So why can't the government produce every product or service that they want to? Why do they seek out contractors? or why would you think that's something that they would have to do?
So that they can get the expertise that they need. Not everybody is going to be an expert in that field for whatever you need to buy.
Yes, so that's a huge thing. So there's a huge skills gap in the government, and I know that it sounds, well, why don't they just hire everybody? It's very expensive for the government to hire their own. Benefits are great, salary, by and large, overarching, benefits are great, the retirement plans are fantastic, salaries are highly competitive. So it's expensive to hire and retain one person for the government. So in comes these sort of contracting agencies where SMEs, the subject matter experts, we work at those, and when the government has a service or product that they need to create, they contract us to, just like you would contract somebody to work on your house. They're not going to live at your house full time and work on your house, but they're going to come for a couple of months. They're going to fix your problem, hopefully do the best job. You're going to review them, and they're going to then move on to a different contract. So there's a demand for a product or service. Then the government says, hey, we would like this new thing. And they ask contracting firms like Booz Allen, like Lockheed Martin, to provide a proposal. We can solve your problem by doing these things. Whatever the government likes, based on quality and cost and a number of factors, they designate a winner and they perform the work. Then the contractors come in, and under the sort of the umbrella of having a government lead, we support that government team or project lead in developing a product or service. It's delivered, and a lot of times we're asked to not only to develop a product or service, but to provide some sort of sustainment effort. High level, feel free to jump in with any questions, ping me with anything as we go along, but that's sort of at a high level. A lot of times, if not most of the time, training is a requirement of these new products or services. So, government can't say, all right, we're going to build this new thing or have this great new idea. And I'm trying to be vague because we're going to get into some brainstorming about what these products and services could be in a bit. But training and teaching people how to use that stuff is hugely critical. Things like new hardware and software, the replacement. Or as you sort of move out of a legacy system and move into something new, those are sort of your technical hard skills. So it sounds like some folks here actually do training on equipment, but there's also training on process, policy, and soft skills. Sort of your how to interact in the workplace and how to be a professional and how to lead a class. Those are your soft skills. It sounds like some folks in the class focus on that right now. Certainly when I was a teacher, I did more training on the soft skills than the technical skills. That's completely changed in the last 2 years. But those are sort of the two big buckets for training that are available in the DoD. So we're going to use some jargon words here, and I'm going to keep this interactive. And sort of the faster we respond and chime in, the faster we can collaborate and move forward. What do you think would trigger a demand signal for training? I want you to think about that. So, yes, there's a new product or service, but what about that would trigger a demand signal for training? And I want us to sort of think about some examples of contracts or needs for training. And one of the ways that we're going to do that is we're going to look at a picture of something to sort of brainstorm and get our brains going. And part of it comes from my obsession with Top Gun, but also I think it's a great representation of some takeaways that we can get for training. So using this picture to sort of get our brains thinking about something that the government might produce, what in this picture screams, we might need training for that?
Planes.
Yes, 1000%. Keep going. Planes and pilots. What? Break that down. I completely agree with you.
Well, Oh, I'm sorry. Was somebody else?
No, go ahead.
Oh, well, like let's say there's a new feature in a plane or a new piece of equipment or something that's built. People need to be trained on how to use it, and any other things that come with it, like data analytics or anything like that, cybersecurity, that kind of stuff.
It sounds like you've talked the talk a while, but yes, 1,000%. So somebody else that wanted to chime in.
Yeah, basically technology is always growing, and I feel like the government always needs to have like the top of the top software and equipment and all that. So government employees always need to be trained on new technology and equipment.
I thought you were going to say the top gun of equipment, and I was going to give you a gold star and say that's pretty awesome. But yes, we'll totally agree with you. So there's the operation of the plane, but then there's also things like how to assemble the plane, how to put it together, how to perform maintenance on the aircraft, how to perform data analysis on some of the modules that come out of the plane, all the engineers that take the data from the plane and work out all the specifics about how to make it more aerodynamic and faster and fuel efficient. What's interesting though about this picture and the Top Gun movie, if you're familiar with it, is the ejection seat, which is hugely prominent in this picture. This was actually one of the major pictures, sort of the capstone picture of Tom Cruise from Top Gun. And if you know the movie, the ejection seat plays a huge role in turning point in the movie when it malfunctions. Spoiler alert, but it's 30 years old, so if you don't know it, I feel like I can say that. What's interesting though is I worked on a team in the DoD that developed safety training for ejection seats. And it was a very important training, as you can imagine, but it's not something where you would think a sort of a pilot would just sort of know to pull a cord. It's a very extensive training, but before you actually get and practice it in real life, like we've been talking about, it's really great to have that simulation. So this is actually something that, moving from a computer-based training where you can identify parts of the ejection seat and sort of see some videos, actually doing it in a setting where you can put a set of goggles on and really see what it's like and eventually feel what it's like. That's a huge return on investment and cost savings for the DoD and enhancement for the user community. So we talked a little bit about these demand signals. I think that we had a really good conversation there. So I'm going to skip the follow-up slide. This is a really great graphic, and I'll send this slide deck out here in a couple days, or if not tomorrow, to the class. I'll get this through Dr. Williams. But in a pinch, it sort of breaks down the three types of immersive training. And there are some examples that I'll show, but I always go back to this graphic. I use this when I talk to government clients and customers. It paints a really good picture. So virtual reality puts things in front of you on top. I'm sorry, virtual reality is sort of like you're completely immersed in that environment. So you don't see anything except what's in the screen in front of you. You are completely immersed. Augmented is actually sort of where I do a lot of my focus, is you can see the world in front of you, but you see displays on top of that. If you're familiar with the Google Glass, where you sort of put on this set of glasses and you can see your menus of your screen, but you can still see the real world. That is augmented reality. It augments what's in front of you in real life. Mixed reality is closer to augmented, where you can see the real world around you, but you can interact with it. So in this, it's a picture of a dolphin. Why it's in the living room, I don't know, but this user could potentially actually rotate the dolphin on top of the sofa, again, for reasons I don't know, but actually manipulate it and perform actions on that object. Whereas augmented is more so, I can see there's sort of these data cards, it looks like text, how to navigate. This is sort of the equivalent of a heads-up display that you might get on a newer car, and circling back to virtual, where you're completely immersed in your environment. So Right here, if you can see my laser pointer, this is Microsoft's Hololens, which I have developed some training content for. It's really good for maintenance because you can see training videos, slides, content. It actually looks very similar to what this picture is representing. It's not just sort of a fancy marketing mock-up, but you can do it hands-free. So operators or maintainers on a system, on an aircraft, in a factory can perform a task and have the video or display in front of them, and it's safer. They don't have to refer to a manual, and it's time effective. The other thing is watching these videos and seeing that sort of rich media, in my opinion, and in the opinion of the industry and users, is so much better than just reading a tech manual. And I write tech manuals, so there's a huge importance for them. But in terms of performing the task and meeting the criteria for success, this is definitely a huge improvement. Virtual reality, I know a lot of folks said that they used the Oculus Rift. Similar, there's a model called the Vive, it's HTC. And as you can see, for folks who are not familiar with virtual reality, this person can't see anything outside of what's in the goggles. So where on the left, I can see, she can see through the glass in the world around her with pop-up display. She is completely immersed in her environment. And right now, these sort of hand controls allow you to move around in your environment and jump from place to place. And that technology is evolving. But that's your sort of two major differences is augmented and mixed reality is in front of you, sort of display on top of the real world, where virtual, you are completely immersed. And honestly, if that's the only takeaway from sort of what is the technology from this presentation, I think that's a really great takeaway. Want to kick this back. So I know we kind of all have a different background, soft skills, technical skills, the classroom, maintenance. We talked earlier about, in the program, as ISDs in training, we learn when you would need to use training, but also when you do, what kind of training is important. Would you do computer-based training or instructor-led training, or would you do a job aid? So just really quick, when would you use something like augmented or mixed reality? And when do you think you would use something like virtual reality to learn something?
So I think this is Brad. I think in virtual reality, you would be using that for situations that you either can't create organically, or situations that would be unexpected. So for paramedics arriving on the scene, you can't fake making those really with the intensity and unknown outcomes. In VR, you can kind of set that up in a way that would make it seem realistic, I guess.
I completely agree with you. Good. What else? What are some other use cases for AR, MR versus VR?
Maybe for VR, you can use in more dangerous situations than AR, where you're not using it as much as a dangerous situation.
One of the big things right now in the Department of Defense, and folks who work in the industry, you'll recognize this, and not just for us, but for anybody who works anywhere, is active shooter training. Schools are doing it. I did it back in the school system. Huge in government. The risk is high anywhere. It's the state of the union. It's where we are now, and the government is trying to figure out if and how they can use these immersive platforms to create realistic active shooter situations. So we're not talking about, something that goes to the military user community, but something for the employees, internal. That's a huge deal. And something you probably couldn't replicate with AR, MR is that intensity, right? That you said, it's that environment. And sort of weighing the blood and gore and the realistic factor over people's anxiety is something that's being discussed, because there are some virtual reality platforms that are amazingly real and intense. And we were talking about getting motion sick earlier. It's very real. there's an animated element to it, but once you're in those goggles, you're in it. If you're on a mountain and you're afraid of heights, you're going to be afraid to take that next step if the program is developed well. So those are great use cases, definitely a good sort of back and forth between the two. Any other sort of thoughts on when they might use an AR, MR versus VR?
Jason, I'll just add an article I read about Walmart training. They were using virtual reality to train new employees on how to deal with different types of customers, some pleasant customers, some with slight attitudes maybe, and they kind of used it as training so that the new employee didn't have to wait for that situation to actually happen in real life. They could kind of experience it, go through how they would deal with that situation. The management could kind of give them feedback on that. So that's one way that Walmart was using VR. But for Northrop Grumman, I could see us using AR and MR as new employees are working on products and kind of having, like you said, that documentation there right in front of them, and they can either watch a video, maybe a micro video, or have some information there that's going to aid them in completing their job.
Yes, that's fantastic. I can picture, I mean, I don't know of this Walmart video, but I'm picturing sort of putting on a headset and seeing a customer get up in your face and pointing at you and expletives and stuff like that, putting on, there's volume in these things, there's headsets, you can hear, audio. That could be very intense and very useful. Thank you. So where do we play a role in all this? Because if I go back a slide, this is very tech forward. It involves, and I'm going to be completely honest, it involves a lot of software development skill sets to develop the pop-up displays and to develop the graphics that go into virtual reality. It's very costly, and it involves a lot of high-level skill sets for your graphic designers and your software developers. I know that I went through the program and I learned Captivate, and I still use Captivate for some internal trainings. I think it's a great program, but the level of acuity technically for graphics and software developer way extends over any book I could get for sort of your traditional e-learning suite. So, where do we fall into play here? Any learning solution, and I think this goes more, more than just immersive. You still need a front-end analysis. You can still do a training needs analysis. You still need, if it's part of a curriculum, especially for a lot of stuff that I do, we have to meet for DoD, the Navy or Marine Corps, Army all have, hey, if they're going to take a training to get their cert, here are the learning objectives they have to meet. Very standard. We can still map those out, but instead of learning it through an instructor-led training, they would learn it, instead of doing it in a computer-based training through an LMS, they would do it through the immersive learning environment. There's still storyboarding. So let's talk about this, Walmart customer training. Somebody still had to take your Word document or PowerPoint and, script out what the angry employees would say, what the angry customers would say to the employees. And from a learning perspective, I think that's very better off done by somebody who has the training goal in mind than your graphic artist or your developer who's really, skill set driven. But, our ultimate goal is a return on investment in the training product. Any sort of text instruction, so you saw the picture with the augmented where the pop-up was with the video and some steps. Writing step-by-step instructions is something that is obviously, I think, much better done by an instructional designer or technical writer than somebody who's production-based. User experience testing is critical, so it's a learning product, but instead of being in a classroom, sort of your hands-on training, this is an extension of that hands-on training, and in some cases, it very well could be, especially if it's augmented. You can still do your Kirkpatrick evaluation, right? It's still learning, so you can still do your levels 1 through 5 and get feedback. I think things like I got motion sick. I mean that's pretty prominent feedback. How was your experience? Was it safe and warm and cozy like a learning environment? And you're like, no, I got motion sick. That's a great feedback. But ultimately, you can break that down and see the long-term return on investment the training products if you measure the data correctly. If you're, let's say, you know, I like this Walmart customer training idea because it's a little bit more tangible than some of the DoD stuff that I was talking about earlier. You can measure the amount of customer complaints, right? You know, how many incidents have there been in the store that uses this training system? And you can kind of measure your return and your impact. I know that, and I actually have my notes up here, so I might be really impressed with myself if I can pull this up. But somebody in their class, stand by. I don't remember who it was, but I took a little bit of notes. But you know, we had some discussion that eventually project management was going to be a direction as part of their roadmap in their career going from ISD. And I think I was talking to Dr. Williams at the beginning of the class. I mean, absolutely, learning and development and curriculum and all that is very important. But your career path, at least, you know, in my case, is then leading teams of instructional designers and graphic artists in the development of solutions. So my team now, I oversee a team of ISDs, a team of graphic artists, a team of software developers, a team of quality assurance testing folks. My degree is in ISD, but so it's not just, you know, you're really good at learning objectives. No, it's you're a learning consultant, and you know the product that's going to provide the biggest ROI for your customer. So these are, even though it's a shiny object and it looks cool and it can do all this fancy stuff, there's still a lot of rooted e-learning, instructor-led learning, face-to-face, all these sort of skill sets that we learn along the way, especially in the analysis portion. All that is useful in immersive training development. And like I was saying, you know, you are, and I was looking at, and Dr. Williams, you might chime in here. There's a handout attached in this webinar, and it said Dr. Weinstein had a consultant and an ISD versus consultant sort of presentation. Was that something that was given recently as part of this this presentation series?
It was the first class meeting, the last Wednesday of May, I believe.
Perfect. I mean, and I looked at that, and I mean, big light bulb. Yeah, I mean, you are, as ISDs, you are the learning expert. You're the consultant with the vision. Somebody had the vision of, or had the job of teaching people how to interact with customers at Walmart. Well, let's put a customer in front of their face. And you can do all the role playing in a classroom. I mean, that's still, I mean, I remember doing like facilitators guides, and you would, you know, have everybody in the room and you would role play, and one person would be the angry employee or the angry student in my case. One person would be the, you know, the teacher or the employee, and you sort of argue, and that's fine, but it's not as scripted, and you can't, some of that is organic, which is great, but you can do a lot of control here. And they had a vision, and they executed that vision. So even though this is shiny object, lots of skill sets, which I'll talk about, some good learning and development opportunities for folks, you know, your consultant hat is hugely important. It's hugely important here. If you're like me, you studied Addie and Sam a lot during the program, and I'll tell you that I'm a couple of years removed, and whenever we do proposal work, so I sort of work on some contracts, and I say, or proposals, and I say, you know, our company is really great for this training product. The government asks how we do it, and Addie and Sam and Agile, which again was sort of a hot button topic, and I'm not sure where it's falling in the program now, but I had a lot of my cohort talk about Addie versus Sam, like versus Agile. They want to know how it's done, and I would guess that you've heard this a lot, but I do want to kind of talk about it in an overview, especially how it's related to something like not developing a computer-based training, not developing something in Captivate, but developing something that's going to be in a headset where the user has goggles on and they're seeing some learning environment and they're immersed in that environment. So Addie, I know we know that what the acronym is. It's typically sort of slang termed as Waterfall. Why is it Waterfall? Because an entire process is completed before the next process begins, even though this looks like there's some overlap. Sort of the typical idea is that you would do all the storyboarding up front for something, then it would go into design, then it would go into development, and you implement it, but that's for the entire program. And there's sort of discussion of this 2.0, this dynamic ADDIE, which is actually kind of like Agile, and I'll share that. SAM, not as Waterfall, so you're not sort of going in these concrete phases, but instead you develop the product just in iterations. And maybe you're developing the first, second, and third part of the product, but a lot of the ways that folks use SAM is they'll develop the product, it's sort of in its wireframe mode. So what that would look like for virtual reality is if the training was for, let's say, go into the cockpit of an aircraft and identify all the buttons, one SAM iteration might be, it's just black and white images. You can put the goggles on, but it's just black and white. Buttons don't really work. It's very sort of like archaic feeling. Your next iteration, things get fleshed out. There's some colors, there's some feedback, there's some animations, and you keep iterating until it's at that level, that high level of quality that's desired by the customer. If anybody is interested in Agile, I'm hugely an advocate for using Agile in training development, software development, in your life. It's a methodology. It's I hate to say it's cultish, but it's very much like a very robust way of thinking about doing anything. And the idea is that, and this is the first time I've actually seen, I actually did some research to find a good graphic. The first time I've seen Agile being broken out with align and game plan and implement and iterate. But this is the big part, the implement and iterate. And unlike SAM, where things sort of get fleshed out along the way, what happens in Agile is at the end of each iteration or time period, you have a working product that could be delivered, which is huge for Immersive because it's so expensive because of the cost, especially to hire your designer, your graphics team, and your development team. So being able to, let's go back to this cockpit training. I don't want to develop my first 2 weeks and just be black and white. Whatever I develop, I want to be able to actually deliver and have a working product. That could be, you go into the cockpit, you have 2 buttons that work. You can click on them, you get the feedback, you're learning something, just 2 buttons, but it's fully functional. So if your product, if your team lost funding, you would still have a training, but instead of the learning objective being identify all the buttons in the cockpit, your learning objective is identify switches 1 and 2, what they do, and maybe some of the malfunctions of those buttons. And you keep iterating until the customer is satisfied with your product, until you've met the requirements. Very big fan of Agile. For folks who sort of want to learn more about that, please reach out to me like after class. I'll make my email available. Has anybody in the class done, and you can just do a chat or chime in with on the microphone, done any sort of these research papers where ADDIE versus SAM or SAM versus Agile or one of those comparisons of methodologies? Okay. Yeah, in my cohort, that was hugely popular, and I remember in every class, sort of being like, what's the big deal with all these things? I know ADDIE, I know the approach, but actually now it's huge, and I use all this in my day-to-day work. The ISD sort of opened up the door, getting that degree. I was able to find a position and secure a job. It's fantastic. But I found myself in this sort of trade space that, working with designers and developers in these programs, I'm not familiar with those programs. So what's been helpful to me is to sort of learn how to talk the talk, and it makes you a lot more valuable as a designer for instruction, because you can not only talk about learning objectives and be that person, but you can also say, hey, in using Unity or Maya, I know that you can make this object, and it would be very good for learning it if you could rotate the 3D object as they're looking at it to show the electrical port, because that's a place where there's a lot of issues during maintenance. Maybe they're doing something wrong with it, so that's huge. it gives you a lot of credibility, and I think as a professional to sort of branch out. And I am no expert in 3D modeling or Unity development, but if I'm in a room with folks who really know that stuff, I can at least have those conversations to support a really good discussion of what makes the best learning outcome for our customer. So I want to circle back sort of to you know, sort of the Booz Allen company, what I've done. You know, I've kind of found my place through UMBC, through recruiting, but it is a global firm. And before we open this up for sort of question and answer, and really I probably should have done that first, that's a lesson learned for me. Want to just give the opportunity for the class. There's a lot of positions in Booz Allen that are internal, so creating training for the employees of Booz Allen, for your sort of your soft skills, consulting 101, how to present, but also for client facing, which is what I do, where you would actually work on a contract, go to a DoD client or government client and actually work with them to develop training that they need. As a Booz Allen employee, and sort of where I sit in the organization, I can submit resumes and align you to job recs, sort of bypassing a lot of these steps if you just went through the portal. So I encourage folks to jot down my email address, and I'll send this out as well. But look at the website, see if there's instructional design like positions in your area. I know that Booz Allen does have a lot of remote opportunities. I know that my fellow Boozers said that they do a lot of work at home, which is a possibility for some projects. So if you're interested, it hurts not at all to apply. Just shoot me the job number on the Booz Allen site that you see. If you find one, your resume and contact information, and I can put you into the system, and or ping me with any questions about, I see a training and development like position, how does this differ from something else? I'm happy to talk about that with you. And I guess what should have been a slide early, and again, that's lesson learned for me, really want to open up the floor for questions, comments, feedback, like ideas from folks. We covered things from government contracting to a little bit about the different technologies for augmented, mixed, and virtual reality and some of the use cases. But are there any sort of questions or outstanding thoughts that folks have that they wanted to discuss?
Hi, this is Stacy. So a lot of times the learners that I have, well, all the time, are geographically diverse. So how do you see stuff like this evolving or being used in a geographically diverse environment?
That's a great question. That's one of those, so what training is right for you questions. So depending on what the training is, and I'm going to do a lot of hypothetical situations. If your learners are geographically diverse, very difficult to get a headset out to everybody. I would probably actually not recommend Immersive for those trainings. Some workarounds, though, is if you have an onboarding site location. I know that for our company, we have a headquarters that folks get invited to when they're onboarded. Maybe that location has a class set of these headsets that they can use. It's very difficult, and something that we've, as a lesson learned for us and me as an e-learning like developer for Immersive, when we ship out our solutions, we're not only shipping out how to use the training itself, but also how to use the hardware, how to use Microsoft's like Hololens, and there's certain like interactions that you have to do with your hand to make things appear. So we're learning, as this is brand new, that it's not only we need to send them the product, but how to use the product. The manufacturers do some of that, but a lot of the vendors that government uses for these products are third-party commercial vendors. They're Microsoft and some other like companies that folks are familiar with. So that's a fantastic question. I will say, as a really techie answer though to that, one of the things that augmented reality can do, and the Hololens has done, and we're actually working on a white paper for, is the Hololens has a camera on the front of it. And one of the use cases we're talking about for that is being able to, you know, to use it as an opportunity for like remote assistance. So just like how you are, you share your computer screen with the help support at an IT system, being able to sort of, you know, with your phone, I guess you could do the same thing. But imagine calling, I'm sure there's a better example, calling like Jiffy Lube and being able to, you know, show them a live video stream of what you're trying to fix, or your dealer for your car. Very similar thing for some of these headsets. It's a little bit of a different use case, but it still falls under the performance like support training solutions umbrella. It's a really good question though.
Great, thank you very much. That was a great answer.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. This is Brad again. So it's really interesting that you were a teacher before, because I'm looking to transition a couple of years out of teaching as well, most likely. And so I was wondering, like, in making that transition, I know this isn't specifically like what you talked about tonight, but something I'm very interested in. Like, what was the biggest challenge for you in switching from like a traditional teaching role? And I know you did some teaching like online and such, but what was the biggest transition for you?
So one of the best interview questions I think that you can prepare for in making that transition is, how comfortable are you, or how do you feel about teaching or training on content that you are not the subject matter at? So I know that we teach and we major in music or science or elementary ed, and we really know that thing. Then we get certified in that thing, then we go teach it. But as an ISD, you're sort of expected to develop training and learning on potentially like anything under the sun. So that was my biggest fear, I think, going in, is, oh, am I going to have to know all this stuff? Am I going to have to become an expert on all these, especially like these DoD systems? I'm like, I don't know any of this stuff. I don't know how contracting works. I don't know how to fly a plane. I know nothing. So one of the sort of things that I've learned in interviews and making that transition is, that's okay, that you're the expert in developing learning, that you don't have to be the expert in that content, but that you become really, really, really good at working with the actual SMEs in that field. And that's a craft that not everybody has. That's sort of like your consulting, bringing back to what Dr. Weinstein had presented on, your consulting skill set is working with people who know the intense jargon, technical aspect of what you're trying to teach, and then your job converting that to a teachable application. So that was sort of the biggest shift, and I guess, you know, cultural difference between being in the classroom where you're the expert to now where you're truly a consultant and a liaison and a facilitator between folks who really know how to do things and you who's converting that to something that's a teachable application.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes, sir. A last go round for questions, comments.
This is Connor again. Sorry. Back on like the Maya and Unity. So how much knowledge did you have to gain to really understand it as well as you do now, and to be able to kind of teach it or kind of introduce it to clients and customers?
Yeah. So I know you said a lot of different things, and I definitely don't teach it. But what you said about being able to introduce it to clients, that's huge. So I took, it was like a 3-day course on Maya. Your first day is sort of like your first day with a PowerPoint, how to use PowerPoint, or how to use Captivate, what all the menus are, what all the buttons do, totally cool. But then you start getting into those simulated trainings. You know, we're going to, as a class, build a rocket ship, which we did, and my rocket ship was a little skew and probably wouldn't go very far, but I still made one. But it allowed me then to, when I'm talking with people about, well, Jason, tell me the kind of programs that you're going to need to purchase to develop my training application, what they cost, what they do. I can talk a little bit in the weeds about what it does, and then how you would convert a 3D object to Maya to another software application and how that works. I don't typically get fielded a lot of those sort of, how would you render the side of the rocket ship? No, but what was definitely helpful in seeing it done is it gave me the idea of the level of effort that it would be to create a wireframe rocket ship versus something that's in color versus a rocket ship that's animated that actually flies into space. It gave me a huge appreciation for folks who really know what they're doing. So yeah, Maya in particular, which is a couple-day training. The Unity was a sparse instructor-led training throughout the course of a couple of months. That's the application that I know folks use for development for virtual reality. Very intense program. It can do a lot of amazing things. And same thing, it really allowed me to talk about the level of effort, the capabilities of the software, but also I got familiar with the program itself and the manufacturer and the cost of every kind of package. Just like at one point, I'm sure folks had to learn what Adobe Photoshop could do or what Captivate could do and the cost and all that kind of stuff. So not so much the how to do stuff in the program, but what the capabilities are and how long it actually takes to develop a product in those programs.
Gotcha. Thank you. I didn't really realize the scoping of projects part of it. That's really interesting.
Yeah, that's something it really just depends on your career path. But I think a lot of ISDs, just from my personal experience, find themselves leading things a lot faster than they expected to. You are the expert in learning, so if you have a team working for you, they're going to go in and say, well, what's the best way to showcase this, or how do we do a video for XYZ? And especially if you're your own consultant, sort of full life cycle, there's ISDs that learn Captivate or Storyline, and they do it all. They storyboard, they produce the training, they output it, they evaluate it, they do everything. But if they wanted to include some fancy things like 3D graphics or modeling, they would need to sort of at least get a high level, what does Maya do? How long does it take to create something, so they can give an accurate quote to their customer.
Awesome, thank you.
Yes, sir. Around the room one last time. Cool, so what I'll do is I'll make sure all the links work in the PowerPoint and everything is good to go, and I'll distribute this through Dr. Williams. I'm gonna leave this up just for another couple of minutes if you wanna jot my email down. Feel free to send me an email just to get it on your radar, just to ping me. And then if you down the line, if you want to look at careers at Booz Allen or like ISD jobs, or talk about the transition from teaching to something else, I'm happy to chat. Feel free to reach out. And Dr. Williams, I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to present this evening.